Hey guys, welcome back to the latest episode of the Growing a Dental Practice podcast. I am your host, Mike Hennon. Today I am joined by Justin Leigh, who is the founder of Focus for Growth, which is a sales and leadership training company specializing in the dental market. Justin is the best-selling author of the book Inspire, Influence, Sell, which is all about mastering the psychology, skills, and systems of the world's best sales teams. Justin has trained thousands of business professionals in amazing companies like 3M, Align Technology, the MiSmile Network, mydentist, Biohorizons, and many, many more. Hey Justin, how are you? How's life?
Hey Mike, very well, thanks. I'm really good. Yeah, I'm really well. Thanks for inviting me on. How are you doing?
No problem. I'm very good, thank you. Yeah, really excited to have you on today's episode. We've only known each other like a short time, haven't we? But feels like I've known you a long time, and I can't wait to probe into what you do, how you help dental professionals, and all the other lovely stuff that we get to cover. So without further ado, I'm going to ask you just to introduce yourself, tell us about yourself, your background, how you got to this point, really.
Okay, yeah, Mike, it does feel like we've known each other a little bit longer than just the short period we have, but I think we've done a few introductions to people in our network as well, so perhaps that's why it feels like that. But no, thanks for inviting me to join you. I'm really pleased to be here and to have this discussion today. Yeah, so my background, my name is Justin Leigh. I'm the founder of a company called Focus for Growth. We're a sales and leadership training company, and we specialize in the dental market. We specialize in the dental market because that's my original background. So I'll give you a very quick kind of potted career history. I started out in dentistry as a dental technician just after I left school, qualified, and then realized it wasn't the kind of career path I wanted to pursue long term. So I moved then from being a dental technician to dental sales and started out in a territory, started to meet, dentists, dental technicians, other dental technicians, covered a territory that was pretty much the south of England. So I got to know a lot of people in dentistry. And that first company I worked for a couple of years, and then I moved from there, which was kind of retail side, order taking, and we pretty much were a one-stop shop, used to service practices and labs for everything they could buy. Then I moved to the other side of that part of the business, which is manufacturer side. So it was with Dentsply. I had about 4 years with Dentsply, which was really good experience. It was the first time I was exposed to really formal training and development, like proper professional development, and training courses for consultative selling, training courses for leadership. They were a really good company, made some great investments. And then in 99, I moved from Dentsply to 3M, and that kind of started a different career path for me because I was only in the dental business for about 3 years, and then I moved out of dentistry into medical devices, and that I guess that time in my career, really some transformations happened. I moved from being, seeing myself as someone who was in dentistry and in a sales role. I then started to think about leadership. I moved into managing large sales teams. They then helped me through a leadership development program where I started to think about broader business skills, became a business leader for them, and then ended up managing multiple businesses for 3M in different markets, different segments. And then in 2017, I decided that I was kind of tired of the corporate world and left 3M and set up my own business and retrained as an executive coach, and recognized as I started to work with clients and individual business owners myself that the knowledge and the experience that you gain from having worked in a large organization where they've made that investment in training and development, and you understand how not only business works but relationships work, and why customers are so important, and servicing the customer and keeping the customer at the heart of everything you do is so important. And so started to work with clients and realized, probably that was 2017-18, by the end of 2019 I realized that the large majority of my clients were in the dental market. And so I made the decision, a more conscious decision, then to focus on the dental market. And that's been brilliant because it's like, for me, it's been like a bit like coming home, coming back to a profession, a customer base that I really enjoy. I like people in the dental market. There tends to be a lot of collaboration, camaraderie. I love the dental marketplace. So kind of back where I feel like I really enjoy my work. And so I work on two sides of the equation in dentistry. I work with some of the major suppliers to the market. So I work with people like Align Technology, Biohorizons, W&H, Septodont, and I even work with the British Dental Industry Association. And then on the other side of that, those larger clients of mine have introduced me to their clients. So I work with some dental groups and associations. So I shall start working with the BDIA this year, which will be great. I'll start that in September. I am working with the MiSmile Network. I'm working with mydentist. So there's a number of different dental groups and associations I've started to work with. So really finding, I guess, a pathway to work and create as much value as possible with clients in the dental space. So that's kind of potted
Brilliant.
career history.
I love it. Brilliant. We had a client, a guest on recently, and they say, once you're in dentistry, you stay in dentistry. Now you got out for a little bit, but it sort of lured you back.
Yeah, I didn't get out for long. I was out for about, I think it was about 12 or 13 years, believe it or not. And I enjoyed the variety that I gained from going into other markets, learning about other businesses, other customers. But it's a strange phenomenon. There is something about the dental market. Even throughout that time when I was outside of dentistry, I still kept some key relationships established, because I guess there were people that would become friends more than just colleagues. So yeah, there is definitely something about the dental market that attracts or draws you back, without a doubt.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have you back. And obviously we've discussed before, I'm still relatively new to the dental industry, but I'm loving it, and I can't really see myself leaving anytime soon. So that's great. So hopefully we'll see each other around.
Absolutely.
Before we get into a bit more specifics into terms of some of the sales and leadership stuff that you do, I'd love to sort of first touch on your book. So you've got a first book.
Yes.
And it's actually quite fun. It's actually quite funny. I've just literally had a conversation with another guy who's launched a book. So it feels like today is very much an author day. An author day, yeah. So tell us about your book, Inspire, Influence and Sell. What's it about? Why did you write it? And kind of how does it help readers?
Yeah, so the book Inspire, Influence, Sell is really for the industry side of, well, any business, but in particular dentistry seems to have taken it to heart. It is about helping sales organizations, sales professionals, business professionals who perhaps have never been through some form of formalized sales training, just to think about the stages and the best approach to have a more consultative conversation with customers. And really, it's one of the things that I learned probably a couple of years into my career in sales. When I moved from the first company I was with to the second company, I was then trained in sales. And up until that point, I was winging it. And I literally was just trying to figure out how to persuade people to buy stuff. And I think it's interesting. As a child, I was quite persuasive. I was quite tenacious. My parents used to say, God, you never seem to give up on stuff. And that served me well, actually, when I went into a sales career, because it's hard work. If you're in a sales job and you've never been trained, it's really, really hard work. You do a lot of kind of groundwork. And for me, I remember it very, very clearly. I went on a 3-day sales training course, and the difference it made for me learning principles, stop talking so much, ask more questions and learn to listen. Sounds really obvious, right? But I think in all of our minds, when we think about salespeople, we think about someone who just talks at us. And that, for me, is the key distinction. Actually, real value-based selling is exactly the opposite of what you think it is. It is not people pitching ideas at you. It is people taking an interest in you, understanding what you need, and then aligning that to what they can offer. That's real selling. And then being able to gain commitment, take you on a journey that delivers, high value and service, so that right the way through the process, the experience works for you as a customer, and in a dental practice context as a patient, and then how that works for the provider of that service, because it has to be a win-win on both sides. But having a structure and a process and an approach that you can use consistently, that is going to create that value, give you confidence in the conversation, and to ask the right questions, to consult with a patient or a customer, really does help sales teams in the context of Inspire, Influence, Sell, to handle those conversations much more effectively. And the net result is always, improved relationships, better consistency in terms of the approach, and that delivers higher rates of growth. So I've got lots of customers that use that model in the kind of business to business sales context, and they find that it works for them and their teams consistently to deliver higher rates of growth. So it's been the book and the programs and the models that go alongside it have been really successful for my clients. I'm very privileged to have been able to work with so many organizations to deploy it, and even more privileged to see the results they've been able to gain as an outcome from that.
No, brilliant. That sounds awesome. So what drove you to write a book? Because it's no easy challenge.
No, it's you're absolutely right. And I had a draft manuscript kicking around for about 2 years, about 2 years, and then I never got round to tidying it up. And then in March 2020, I don't know if you heard about it, but we had a global pandemic.
Yeah, I might have heard about that. Yeah,
there's a few of us involved in this, and we ended up. So I'm sure, like many business owners, I went from tearing around with clients and spending loads of time in the car, traveling, across the country, to being completely locked up. Locked down, whichever is more appropriate, right? And I found myself in a situation where I thought, I've got a bit of extra time, and as well as having my daily walk, which I was allowed at that point due to government regulation, right? I thought, there are some assets in my business, there are some goals that I wanted to achieve that I felt were really far off until all of a sudden I had a bit more extra time. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I did was on a daily basis, I used to just schedule some time in, half an hour to 45 minutes, just to start to work on the book, to be a bit more intentional and serious about it. And so I started that literally as the pandemic hit in March 2020. And then I made contact with a publisher about a quarter later, so about June that year, and worked with them. They were helping me to edit the manuscript. And by November, we published. So we published the book in November 2020. So that year, it probably never would have happened without the pandemic, because I maybe wouldn't have created the capacity to do it. Mm-hmm. So launched and published in November 2020. It became an Amazon bestseller in the UK within that first month of launch, which was amazing.
That's fantastic.
I was more surprised than anybody, but it was great to get the bestseller recognition.
Yeah.
And then, believe it or not, in February 2021, it became a bestseller on the Kindle. We ran a Kindle promotion, and so it actually got bestseller twice, which was remarkable, beyond me really, but very, very pleased that was the net result. And then that just continues to kind of work for my clients in the background. It's integrated now as part of our programs, programs with the book and the content. It seems to complement really well. And then, interestingly, I've had a number of dentists that have bought the book.
Excellent.
And have read the book and kind of circled back to me and said, really enjoyed the content. I've been, using the principles and found it really valuable. So it kind of inspired me, pardon the pun, to write a second book. So literally in the last couple of weeks, I've received the copy of the new book. So the new book,
very nice,
Inspire Consult Cell. So it's almost like the opposite. You got one in red, one in white, and the Inspire Consult Cell book is the Inspire Influence Cell, rewritten and tailored for the dental market and the dental practice. So how do you have a more consultative conversation with a patient? How do you start to ask higher quality questions, listen to what the patient's telling you? How do you start to talk to them about treatment options in a way that are more meaningful, that kind of park the jargon and start to think about what does the patient need to hear to understand the treatment options more fully and to make an informed decision? So it's really, early feedback's really good. Really good, and it's literally available. The publisher I'm working with, I've had that copy a couple of weeks because he was just ironing out some final details, but it literally has gone live today, Mike.
Oh, amazing. Happy book launch day.
Thank you very much. It's available on Amazon Kindle. I'll send you a couple of links offline. We're perhaps including the show
yes. Of
where
course,
people need to order it or review it. So it's really
brilliant. To be honest, I was eventually going to ask you, is there a second book? And you've already answered that question. And it's already available. So it's fantastic.
There you go. That was quick work, wasn't it? So if anybody's thinking of writing a book, here's my tip: skip straight to the second one because it's a lot quicker.
Actually, when we spoke last week, did you say so? It went from, was it 8 months to 4 months for the second? 4 months for the second book. In terms of time frame?
Well, it was the first book. Actually, it was about probably 8 months working with a publisher, but it was 8 months in that pandemic year. But I already had a draft, and in fact, the second book, yes, it is definitely about half the time. I think for me, in this particular instance, I was rewriting the first book to a specific demographic in the second book, so it's perhaps a little easier. And who knows, if there's a third book, it'll be different. It'll be about something completely different. It'll be about coaching as a leadership style if there's a third book, and that's great.
We will definitely include the notes, the links in the show notes. And I'm also keen to get my hands on a copy, so I will visit Amazon after this. I would now like to dive. So we've talked about the book, sort of the book from a high level perspective. We've talked about sales, but you keep talking about consultative sales.
Yeah.
What is that for the listeners right now?
Yeah. So here's how I think about it. Conventional or traditional sales tends to be a bit of a push strategy. So you're trying to persuade someone of something that perhaps they don't particularly want or haven't thought about. And that is a push strategy. So you're trying to disrupt the way the person thinks. You're constantly trying to push your ideas on them. My perspective on that, there are a lot of people do that in different types of sales roles. My perspective is that is not a very effective strategy. The opposite of that is the pull strategy. So that is the consultative sale. And that's when you literally park your idea in your agenda and you go into the conversation with either the patient or the customer with the real intention of understanding what they need. You do that through asking them really good questions, genuine, authentic questions. You listen to what they tell you, you join up the dots, you summarize, you play that back, you just check for understanding. You make sure that you truly understand what the other person needs. And at times, you might say, based on what you just told me, I've got to refer you to somebody else. Or actually, there's someone else in my network that I think you should talk to rather than me about this. And that is a truly authentic way to consult with somebody. But what happens more often than not when you take that approach is that through the questioning, through the understanding of the other person's needs, you will come to a point where you think, and they think, actually, there is a fit here, there's compatibility. And it's at that point of compatibility, you can start to explain how you can help the other person, explain the options, talk through it as a solution, get the other person's agreement on it. And from there, you move to, gaining commitment and agreeing how you'll move forward. And that for me is the key distinction. The first couple of years of my career, before I was trained in how to take that consultative approach, I spent a lot of the time in the push strategy without realizing it, when actually, once I'd understood how to make that transition to a pull strategy or a consultative approach, then that was how it kind of transformed my performance and results. And I know from conversations I have with my clients that not only in the sales context with a sales team selling to a customer, but with dental teams, dentists, TCOs, those key roles in the practice where they're having conversations with patients about treatment options. Very often the dental team can feel a bit like they are pitching to the patient, and nobody wants to do that. Actually, when you think about following a consultative process, it completely changes the way that you have the conversation. The patient feels as if they're being really understood, and then the value creation is higher, as is the understanding of the options. And they tend to find that the patient will then choose the most beneficial option for them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's a bigger investment because actually they realize the value.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So what would that actually look like from a dentist perspective? So I'm in the chair. We've gone through a few things. Like what are the sort of questions you would ask? I guess it all depends on my situation, but just a sort of a generic situation would be amazing.
Yeah. So let's say it was orthodontic treatment. Then some of the questions that you'd want to ask the patient are around one, the kind of duration, how important is it to the patient to how many? Sorry, let me go back. How important is their time, and when they consider treatment, and so the patient will explain that to you. Yeah, well, time, and what about duration and visits? How convenient is it for you to visit the practice? So the patient will explain that. You might start to talk to them about, how important is it that the treatment is discreet? So do you want people to notice you're wearing braces or not? And for adult patients, actually, a lot of patients don't necessarily want fixed braces anymore because they'd rather it was a discreet treatment. You might ask them about, we've talked about time, but really kind of understand, talk about their lives and the busyness of their life and how much time they've got for treatment, because all of those insights that you gain from the questions that you ask from the patient are going to help, the patient to think it through for themselves, because they won't always have thought it through themselves. But two, it helps you as a clinician to understand the priorities that the patient then has. So if I'm a patient, I say, well, actually, I'd like to minimize the amount of visits and minimize the amount of time I have to see the dentist, then that's a strong indicator that perhaps I want to consider something other than fixed braces. Because, whether it's Invisalign or any other clear aligner system, number of visits, time in the chair is reduced. You can use assets like dental monitoring, where actually some of that patient journey and the interaction with the practice team is much reduced. But if you're just presenting that to a patient as, well, we use this, this is a treatment option, until you understand how important time is to the patient, till you understand whether or not they're looking for a discrete option, till you understand, all the other considerations that patient has, what research they've done, who else might they need to talk to about the treatment options as they're making their decision. All of those insights that the patient can share with you. One, you've got to ask the question so that they process it and are able to tell you. Two, you've then got to listen and understand what they're telling you, summarize, and then you can present a treatment option. And I think that's the piece for me that's most important, is once you understand, that the patient's going to be, depending on the situation, asking for this kind of treatment option, there's always going to be a number of options for the patient. You think orthodontic treatment's one example, restorations are another. Do you want something that's tooth colored? How important is strength to you? When it's a replacement tooth, how important is permanency to you? What's your budget? There are lots of questions that need to kind of help the patient to go through that process of consideration. And what we do as part of the model, it's covered in the book and in the programs that we run. We lay out a process and a structure of different questions that we ask. And interestingly, you've got questions on one hand. Once you know what your treatment options are, and the differences between the treatment options and the benefits that they offer the patient, then actually it's about making sure that the questions that you ask help the patient to think through those considerations for each of the different treatment options. So the two things really join up quite nicely: the questions that you ask and the treatment options that you provide.
Excellent. That is a fantastic explanation. Do you find that dentists are quite well aligned with this sort of style of approach? Because obviously they do generally have to sort of explain a patient's options. So do you think they are quite well versed in this kind of style, or better than other sort of industries?
I think they find themselves in the position where they know the treatment options, they know the solution part of it, they know how to explain that to patients. I think what happens, not just to dentists, but it happens to all of us in our careers, the more experience we get, the better we get at what we do, the more reliant we become on just explaining things. We almost go on autopilot. And in my experience, both personal and the work with clients, is that as we do that, we tend to lose our curiosity. So if a patient's in the chair and they're interested in orthodontics, rather than ask them specifically about what they're looking for, whether or not there's something specific they're looking not only to achieve as an outcome, but is there a reason why they've decided now is the right time? And it could be that a wedding's coming up, it could be that a big event's happening, or there's something that's triggered them, or they might have been on so many Zoom calls that they've realized their teeth finally, can't stand looking at myself for another minute longer. But until we ask them the question and get them to tell us, then that all sits inside their mind. And so as we're talking through the treatment options, unless they've had the chance to process that and unpack it with us in a conversation, chances are whatever you explain to them won't resonate, because they haven't had the chance to join it up for themselves. And that is the key ingredient. It's the missing step for many people, not just in the dental practice, but in business more generally. We tend to default to, we can do this, this, and this for you, without asking the questions about what is it specifically you're looking for? What value are you looking to create? Why is now the right time? What's led you to this conversation? How did you find us? What's most important to you as you consider not only treatment, but the outcome you're looking for? Who else is involved in the decision? So there's lots of questions we can ask that will help the patient process. And that's the key. The patient processes their own thoughts and preferences. And as they do that, and we are, the person asking the question, we're then really naturally aligned to be able to say, well, let's talk about options. But we don't talk about the options until after we've asked the questions. And that, for me, is the key distinction.
That's the key.
Gap. Yeah, that's the key gap.
Perfect. So dentists are typically guilty, or not just dentists, but people are guilty of sort of jumping straight to solution and not sort of bringing the patient or customer on that journey.
Absolutely.
Like you said,
me too. Me too, Mike. And I teach and train this content to people all the time. And I'll be in a conversation with a client, and it'll occur to me that I'm talking more than the client. And I will have this moment where I'm like, oh, Justin, you know this stuff, but you're not doing it. So what I will do when I catch myself, and thankfully nowadays I do catch myself more often than not. And so I will then just pause and say, oh, sorry, I'm actually, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. Is it okay if I ask you a few questions? So I'll catch myself. That's my default. Oh, sorry, there's a few things I needed to ask you. Is it okay if I ask you a few questions? In my experience, nobody's ever said no to that question. But it's a really nice segue back from I've probably spoken too much to I need to ask some questions, draws me back, brings the person I'm talking with, whether that's a customer or a patient, back to that point where we switch from me talking to them talking. I go into listening mode, ask them some questions, and from there it all flows again. So
so you can sort of you can save the situation.
Yeah, you can, but you have to create the awareness in the first place. And so, yes, it happens with dentists, TCOs, salespeople, right? But even the people that train it.
So that's reassuring.
It is.
It's like I said, it's something you have to learn. It's something you can learn, which is great. It's not something that you have to necessarily be born with or whatever. So that's reassuring for most listeners. You can learn it.
Yes,
it just takes practice, doesn't it? Like anything, it takes practice, takes time.
It does.
I guess you'll start to form a habit as well. It'll become part of a habit of how you approach patients.
Absolutely. So and I've got in the book and in the models there is a process that I call Inspire. And Inspire is the sales stages that we go through, or the communication stages we go through. And each one of the stages is a letter in the word inspire. So it's a mnemonic that starts to embed in your mind as you start to work through it. So the I is for insight, being able to share things that are valuable to the patient right at the start of the conversation, insights. The N is then for needs. So we have to understand what the patient needs. So we'll ask questions and listen until we understand the patient's needs. And there's models that we use to ascertain the needs. Then the S is solutions. So that's when we talk about treatment solutions. The P is proposal. So we make a proposal about, the recommendations that we have for the patient based on that solutions discussion. And then the final stage is initiate action. We want to give the patient the easiest way to take action and next steps from here. And so that takes us right the way around the model, inspire. And then the RE is reflection. So taking some time after the patient consult or on a regular basis just to reflect on the communication, the model that we're using, and is it working? What changes do we need to make? And how can we improve and evolve our approach? So it's a really nice simple, mnemonic methodology that gets us, the results that we want time and time again.
Brilliant. Sounds awesome. Love it. So we've talked quite a bit about sales, but
yes,
another aspect of what you do is leadership. Now, you specifically talk about coaching leadership. What is that, and how is that different from, like, I guess, everyone's general perception of leadership?
Yeah, so coaching leadership is a style of leadership, and so I explained earlier how I went into sales straight from the laboratory and had a couple of years figuring it out myself. I was going to say with some success, more failure than success, but I figured some of it out. And it wasn't until I was then trained that I realized, actually, there's a way to do this that's more consultative. Well, turn the clock forward about 6 years. I'm at 3M. I'm in a sales and key account management role in dentistry, and I was offered a job, or I applied for and gained a job as a sales supervisor. And my first foray into supervision and management didn't go particularly well, because I forgot all the lessons I'd learned about consultative, taking a consultative approach, asking questions and listening. And I started managing a sales team, and I was very directive. I figured that, I'd been a high performer through, yes, taking the right approach, but quite a, good work ethic, quite dynamic, seeing lots of customers, engaging, networking really well. And I assume that, that's how people have to do it, right? So I went into a sales role for about 6 months. I was leading a sales team, and I wasn't a very good manager because I was far too directive. And to the point where I was asked if I wanted to do something else. So I got demoted in my first, I don't tell many people this, but I got demoted in my first sales management job. And it's a good job I did, because it taught me a really valuable lesson. And that lesson was that people don't like being told what to do. If you want a high-performing team, you want people to perform at the highest level possible, you can set direction, but then you should enable the team and empower the team and coach the team to achieve the results. And that was the key distinction. I didn't get that first time round. And in between the first time I tried to be a sales manager and the next time, which was 2 years after that, I went on a coaching program. So I was taught key principles of leadership, and in particular, how to take a coaching approach to leadership. And the same thing happened with me as happened when I learned how to consultatively sell. And that was that my leadership style changed from being directive to being a coaching and consultative style of leadership. So I would have a conversation with a team member, one of my key, either at that time it was salespeople, and eventually I ended up managing teams of leaders, which was great. Even more important to take a coaching leadership style when you're managing leaders, because they are, generally speaking, higher performing people. And the idea of a coaching style is that you effectively set a direction, talk about a vision, be really clear on where you want things to go. But in terms of how you get there, that's when you switch from here's the direction to how do you think we should get there? What ideas have you got? What support do you need from me to implement those ideas? What other options do you have? And how often should we check in, and how best to communicate with each other? And how do I hold you accountable? And what do I need to do to get the best from you as a contributor to the business? And being able to park ourselves, recognize that we don't always have to just give people the nuts and bolts, do this, do that at any point in time, and switching to set direction, ask key questions really does change your capability as a leader. But it's quite an unnatural thing to do, because we tend to want to just give people direction, tell them what to do, and then kind of follow up if possible. Yeah. I don't know what it is about us as humans, but we do tend to have this need for control. And actually taking a coaching approach, we have to relinquish a bit of control, let the other person regain the control of that, objectives, goals, and their own performance. And that really does empower people and generates higher performing teams.
No, that's brilliant. What kind of impact can say, taking sort of a coaching leadership approach have on, say, a dental practice? Now, obviously, this sort of, your initial foray into this was with big organizations, but like thinking of a smaller practice, how can that benefit a practice environment?
I would say it's even more important in a smaller practice environment. When you think about the individual roles in a practice, people have to be able to work independently and autonomously. So if you're the practice manager or you're a principal or a partner in the practice, you just don't have the capacity to be in all places with all of your team all of the time. So being able to set clear direction and then coach people so that they are able to improve their performance, gain greater clarity, motivate and engage themselves in their work is really important. So I would say it's even more important in a smaller business. And I run like an SME now myself, a small to medium enterprise, and the coaching and leadership style is even more important now than it was when I was in a large business. But that transition from directive leader to coaching leader is really important. Not only does it help people to get clearer on their autonomy and their roles, the other thing that it does is it inspires greater commitment and engagement. So when people are coached, when they figure their roles out for themselves, figure out how to improve, figure out how to perform at new levels, and that's kind of pulled from them in a coaching style, they have greater commitment. They feel more engaged and they feel more connected with the business or the practice and their team members and their leader or manager. The other thing it does is it helps with progression and succession. So if you're looking to help people get better at their roles and potentially move up, from say nurse to senior nurse to practice manager to TCO, actually helping people migrate through those different roles and elevate their performance. One of the optimal ways to do that is to take a coaching approach, because the only way that person is going to make that improvement is then by themselves. Yes, you can mentor and guide them, but ultimately they are the ones that have to come to the conclusion around what they want and how they're going to perform better for themselves and the business. So in my experience, it's even more critical in a small business, and it's even more valuable to people in smaller businesses.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant, and it definitely sounds like it would make a big difference. Just the idea of not directing someone, and if you're coaching them, you're almost like giving them more respect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that can be way more valuable, especially like from a nurse perspective. Like they do a lot of work, and a lot of them are underappreciated.
Yeah.
So being told exactly what to do isn't going to add to that kind of situation, and actually sort of getting them to sort of take ownership of their roles and responsibilities and to sort of guide them rather than direct. It must make a big difference into like morale and stuff like that.
Yeah. And we know there's a recruitment crisis in dentistry at the moment. You could argue it's a retention and recruitment crisis, right? Because retention is the big challenge. How do you retain your most valuable members of staff? Okay, to a certain degree, yes, you have to pay them at market rates. You have to pay them a rate that you believe and they believe is fair and equitable. But beyond that, if you can get that arguably anywhere, right? So what is the difference then? So the difference then becomes relationships. The difference becomes the respect I have for the practice leader or the practice manager. The difference becomes, how well am I treated? How well is my opinion sought? Do I see a future for myself in the practice? Do I agree with what we're doing and the difference we're making in our local communities? There's lots of things you can do, and all of that is led by a coaching approach to leadership, thinking about engaging the team, asking their opinion, gaining their ideas. You can only get that by taking a coaching approach. If you're focused on just constantly being the person that gives direction and sets the standard, then over time that becomes unsustainable. And I've also been in those situations in the past where when the pressure and the stress builds in a business, we tend to default to our preferred behaviors. And for a lot of us, we want a sense of control, so we go back to almost like let me give direction. And the minute you find yourself doing that, you kind of start to undermine yourself without realizing it. Your team disengage. It actually gets more difficult to work. You find yourself putting yourself under more pressure. And I've been there, unfortunately, a few times in my career. And thankfully now I have I default to this coaching style of leadership, this coaching approach. And if you can get yourself to almost reset your preferred approach to leadership and preferred approach to management of your team and your organization, and find a way to help your team or empower your team to help you stay there. Because once you start to take that approach and you tell your team, one of the things I advise, there's a first stage. What I have a model I call, it's the coach model, COACH. And the first stage is the C, which is contracting. So it's to have an informal contract with each member of your team. And one of those terms of the contract is, I'm making a real effort to become a better leader. I would like you to help me to remain a better leader. So, here is permission. We have a contract together. Here's permission for you to call me out if I ever get too directive, if I'm ever in a bad mood, if I'm ever, taking an approach that you find inappropriate. Please, please, please call me out. That's a contract between us, right? And at the same time, as a manager, I would like to see the highest levels of performance. I'd like to be able to tell you when perhaps I see opportunities for you to develop and improve. And I'd love to do that so that neither one of us takes it personally. We both see it for what it is, which is a development opportunity, and our relationship stays strong throughout. How does that sound? Now, there are very few employees in the world that would say, I'm not signing up to that. And all of a sudden, as a first stage of your approach to coaching leadership, you're actually helping yourself sustain that coaching approach through the contractual conversation with your team and individuals in the practice. So there are steps we can take that help us not only adopt the approach, but actually embed it and implement through the conversations we have with our team. So models and structure help us to do that. Without models, we kind of feel like we are almost trying to find a path ourselves. And actually, one of the things I've learned is when you've got people that have got a lot of experience in a domain, whether that's clinical practice or it's business leadership or it's consultative selling, very often if you invest some time and energy into learning that, it can kind of fast track something you perhaps couldn't have figured out in years. As I said, I was trying to sell for 2 years unsuccessfully, 3-day training course, and I'm like, oh, that's how it works. Same with leadership. 6 months in a leadership role, failed, come out, go on a coaching program. Next time I'm successful. So it's there are people that we can role model and we can learn from that just give us the roadmap to success. It's so important that we seek those people out.
No, I love that contractual thing you mentioned. I think that would benefit a lot of practices if they had that you can, because I guess we're all we don't want to be overcritical, but there's the balance, isn't there? There's that, how do we provide feedback without the other person taking it on personally or negatively? And actually, it's a two-way thing. Being a business owner or a principal, you're going to make mistakes, and actually getting the feedback from your team is important, but being able to do it the other way around. So I like the fact it's you're making it a very obvious two-way street. So there should never be a situation where you're just saying you're putting down your staff, or they think they feel like we're putting them down all the time. Actually getting them to give you feedback as well. Sounds like a great idea.
It's so important. And, the thing about leadership is it's not easy. One of the key principles of leadership is being prepared to be vulnerable. Saying to members of your team, look, I'm not perfect. And when I'm behaving imperfectly, I'd like you to flag it with me. That takes courage, right? That's a really difficult thing to do because it damages our ego. But interestingly, we think it will damage our ego. Interestingly, the opposite happens. When I'm prepared to park my ego and I say to other people, actually, I really need some help here. I don't have it all figured out. I'd love for you to flag it with me and just, I'm going to be open with it. And even say, at times, what's going to be difficult for me is that I might feel defensive. So at the point when you sense defensiveness, will you just remind me of this conversation so that I bring myself back to the present moment, recognize you're doing it for the benefit of me, our relationship, the practice, the business, the patients, etc. And just in that moment when you create that safety and that contract with the other person, you allow yourself and them to deepen, strengthen the relationship, and all of a sudden everything changes. The whole dynamic changes, and we don't recognize how valuable that is as a first stage in our coaching approach. And there's more to it than that, but that is a foundation. If anybody's in a situation at the moment where they're kind of thinking, God, that would be useful for me, I guarantee, think about next one-to-ones that you have with key members of your teams. Think about that. I call it the reset conversation. So have a reset contracting conversation. And the great thing is, if you say to somebody, I'd like to be able to give you open feedback. If you say, I'd like to be able to give you open feedback, but I want you to watch everything you say to me, you'll never get anywhere with that, right? It just doesn't work. But if you say, look, I would really like you to give me feedback when I'm in a blind spot, I don't realize that I'm doing what I'm doing, you will be able to see it. And I give you full permission to just help me to see it. But I'd also like to do the same for you. That's a quid pro quo. Everybody will buy into that. So we have to recognize the importance of that, mutual exchange. But to have that contracting conversation, to be able to say, from here on in, this is how I'd like us to work. You're not saying in that moment, I'm going to give you some feedback. You're saying, in the future, I'd like to do this. People sign up to it. It just makes it easier. So you kind of almost have that opportunity to press that reset button. It's so valuable for relationships.
Yeah, no, it honestly sounds fantastic. I think it could change a lot of relationships between sort of employer and employee. Like there can be quite a bit of friction, but having that conversation, or even something like a reset conversation, like you mentioned, that could be really useful. So I'm definitely going to be highlighting that on the promos.
Yeah, good. Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I hope people find it valuable. I'd love to hear if any of your listeners like that principle. Try it. Get in touch with us. I'd love to hear how that goes for you, because my experience is I've not had, on a personal level, I've not ever had that go any other direction than more positive. And for clients of mine, they've had exactly the same experience, that they do that. It's like, God, I wish I'd done that years ago.
Yes.
It's just transformed the relationship with either, someone that it's been sticky with and you've kind of had to get through a difficult period, or even people that they've gotten okay with, and then it goes to the next level in terms of the commitment and engagement. So really powerful principle.
Yeah, brilliant. That's great, Justin. So we've obviously talked quite a lot about leadership and sales, and this podcast is for the aspiring or new practice owner.
Yes.
So what are some of the things that a new principal can do to both improve their leadership style and the sales within their practice? Now, obviously, one of the things is probably the reset conversation we just talked about. But what else can people do from a both sales and leadership perspective?
So let's pick them one at a time. So actually, for both sales and leadership, here's what I would recommend. Make sure that you engage your team. So engage the practice team. You're not in this on your own. Just make sure that everybody understands the importance of it. Make sure that you're open to input, to suggestions, to improvements, to feedback, because that when you set up a new practice, you're super busy. You've got so much going on. You're spinning all these plates. You've got all this stuff going, and actually, you can find yourself doing stuff that isn't engaging with your teams, and all of a sudden, your team can start to feel a bit disconnected. So I'll just remind you now. Go back to the importance of pulling together your team, engaging people, having quality conversations, soliciting feedback, being open to that feedback, acting on it. Okay, really, really important for both sales and for leadership. For a sales perspective, I would also urge you to really focus in on the patient. When you're a new practice, the patient experience is everything, because you want every new patient coming in to want to come back. So they've got to feel like they are the only patient that's with you at any point in time. So be present in every one of those conversations. Make sure that you're cultivating, the relationships. You're asking good questions. You're getting to know them. You're making a note of what they tell you, so that you can join up what they've told you with their patient experience every time they come in, because you're building lifelong relationships. Hopefully, okay, that's the principle. And just make sure that the whole team are bought into that. We build lifelong patient relationships in this practice, and kind of get that into the the environment and the culture that you create as a practice. That would be my piece for kind of selling and the patient experience. From a leadership perspective, as well as keeping this open dialogue, the other thing that's really important is the rhythm. How often do you communicate as a team? And there's a really powerful principle I'm sure your listeners will have heard of, the daily huddle. Give yourselves as a team 10 to 15 minutes every day to get together first thing in the morning before the day starts, and set a structure for that conversation. Just give everyone the opportunity to input, to talk about what's happened the previous day, what does their current day that's coming up look like, what support do they need, what's outstanding, how can you help, and think about your role in that daily huddle to seek to understand what's going on in the practice and energize the team ready for that day. And if you do though, if you can do those couple of things as a new leader in a practice, that will really help you establish some really positive foundations for you, your patients, and your team.
Brilliant. They are some fantastic tips, Justin. Really good. Again, I have to make sure I highlight them somewhere, probably definitely in the show notes.
Yeah, thank you.
But no, that's been fantastic. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you as always. And now I'd like to flip it around a little bit. I'd like to talk about your podcast.
Yes.
So your podcast, you were wondering where I was going then, didn't you?
I'm ready for anything, Mike. I'm ready for anything.
So you're a fellow podcaster, and I believe the podcast has come out this week. Is that right?
Yes.
It won't come out. This isn't the week that we're releasing this episode, but it's out now. So we're actually probably a few episodes deep, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
But
yes.
Tell me about. So your podcast is called Dentistry on Purpose.
Yeah.
And it's with a guy called Mark Topley.
Yes.
Tell me about the podcast.
Yeah.
Give me a little bit of an intro to Mark as well, and just give us an idea of what to expect from your podcast.
Okay, so we launched the podcast Dentistry on Purpose on middle of February, so middle of February 2022. We've been working on it for the last 8 months, Mark and I. Mark Topley is a CSR and ESG coach specializing in dentistry. So, corporate social responsibility, environmental, sustainable businesses. And Mark works with lots of different leaders in the dental space, same as me on the professional side, and he's got some industry clients as well. And Mark and I met at some speaking events and just decided, sorry, I thought my phone was on silent, Mike. Mark and I, let me go again. Mark and I met at a number of speaking events, and Mark's a really good guy. He's a coach working with lots of different clients, and we have some similar clients that we work with as well. That's how we kind of got introduced to each other. And I've always been interested in podcasts. It's my go-to for learning and development. So I tend to listen to a lot of different podcasts. So some of them are in dentistry, some of them are not in dentistry. I listen to a lot of business and leadership podcasts, which I kind of enjoy. I get lots of nuances and tips. And so I'd had this idea to create a podcast, but to be honest with you, I didn't want to do it on my own because there's a lot of work involved, as you know, Mike, doing it on your own, right? So I had this conversation with Mark and just said, I've got this idea. I'd like to set up a podcast. What do you think? And he was immediately interested, actually, which was great. I found that quite complimentary because he didn't just bat me away, which was good. Yeah. And then, so we had a meeting, kind of discussed, okay, how would it work? What would it look like? What would be the theme? And we came up with this theme of purpose. So Mark is a corporate social responsibility coach. So from his perspective, a lot of the work he does is about purpose. It's about meaning and really thinking about a value-driven business. The work I do tends to be very focused on business, very focused on teams, leadership, and thinking about how you sell and grow your practice. So that's about having a more intentional plan for your business. So we came at it from this perspective that purpose has two meanings for us. One is the purposeful venture that your business is. The second is the intention that you put behind it. So it becomes a business that you're kind of driving and growing rather than it just being by default a clinical practice. And so Dentistry on Purpose was born, and we've been really delighted with some of the guests. We've in season 1, which is all recorded now. In season 1, we've had Sandeep Kumar, who is the MiSmile Network founder. We've had Chris McConnell, who's the president of the BACD. We've had Samir Patel, who's the co-founder of 11 Dental. Edmund Profit, who's the chief exec of the British Dental Industry Association. So we had some really, there's eight guests, some really, really great people. And we really focused the questions on leadership and purpose from those two perspectives that I just explained. And some of the answers we had to those questions were phenomenal, actually. Really, really great insights. And off the back of it, I was saying this to Mark the other day, off the back of it, I've been and bought at least 5 different books as direct recommendations.
I was going to say, you're going to end up with a very large library.
Yes.
Everyone's got a book or two to recommend, and it's just like, you're like, I need to read that.
Yeah. I read probably a couple of books a month, so I'm a bit of an avid business book reader. I'm constantly on the search for those new development priorities, the different aspects that make a difference for us. So yeah, it's
excellent.
great.
And have you enjoyed the podcast process?
Yes, yeah, really good opportunity to get to know some key people in dentistry that either I know already and learned a bit more about their experience, or meet new people, which has been great. And working with Mark was good fun as well. We enjoyed the process of going through it. We're now starting to plan season 2. So season 1, we'll release an episode each week from kind of end of February right the way out to, I think it works out to kind of April time, and then we'll hopefully be in a position to launch season 2 not long after that as well. So yeah, hopefully it'll be an ongoing process.
Excellent. Yeah, I find this. So I started last year, and this year I've made a more active commitment to obviously finding guests, recording podcasts, launching them, and everything. And it's just like, just really enjoying the process, and it's a great way to meet people. I probably wouldn't have met you. I think we connected on Facebook, and then if I hadn't done a podcast, I wouldn't have reached out to you to say hi. So it's a great networking tool as well. From my perspective, but no, it's brilliant. So the first episode will be out. First episodes will be out by now, won't they? By the time this comes out.
Yes, it will. So definitely.
Go and check. So go and find it. I'm assuming it's on Spotify, Amazon, Apple Music, all those. If
you just search Dentistry on Purpose, it will come up on the search results. You'll find it.
Excellent, perfect. Right, so go and check that out, guys. And then one more thing to talk about is so on top of all of that, you also volunteer and run a men's mental health group called Walk and Talk for Men. Tell me more about that. How did you get involved, and how does it help the people that are part of the group?
Yeah, so I started this in March 2021. I've been planning it for about 3 months ahead of that. I noticed that a couple of people in my network were running walks for men's mental health. And they were meeting as a group of men in a local kind of either park or somewhere that was a kind of area of natural beauty, and just spending an hour to 90 minutes walking, talking, and providing a safe space for men. And as I said, I noticed it on social media and reached out to one of my contacts and just asked a bit more about it. They were telling me how they got involved, and it was part of a national group. So I contacted the founder and just asked what it would take for me to set one up in Cambridgeshire. And he was delighted, because they're continually looking for new walk leaders and to expand and develop the group. So I started it in March 2021 and set up a Facebook page. So it's called Walk and Talk for Men St. Neots, which is the town where I live. And at the first, I published it into a couple of local Facebook groups and pages. And I run it at a nature reserve, a place called Little Paxton. It's like a wildlife reserve. It's a beautiful little spot. And I turned up at the first walk expecting there to maybe be a couple of people there, because it was the first time I'd done it. And we had 8 people join us for the first walk. So
wow.
I was absolutely over the moon, because at that point I genuinely was prepared to walk around on my own in case nobody showed. But we had 8 people. And so then I ran it monthly for about 3 months. And thought, this is working. And there was a chap joined me on one of the walks, a guy called Steve Whitney, and there was no dental contacts here, no dental relation. It was just local kind of community initiative. And this guy Steve Whitney joined me. He told me his backstory, got an interesting kind of story with his own life and journey, and then asked me if he could help me and get involved. So I bit his hand off. And between the two of us, we now run 2 walks per month.
Yeah.
And we've got up to, so the last walk we had 2 weeks ago, we had 33 men join us.
Wow.
So it's become a bit of a local community all on its own. And we have a walk coming up this Sunday. We've got, I think, 30 pre-registration. So we could even beat the 33, which is our highest number so far. It just seems to keep growing and increasing each fortnight. But it's interesting because it's become, we've got a WhatsApp group for it. We've got, the walk publicised. We've mapped out the walks for the rest of the year. And one of the key pieces of feedback we get from not just the men that join us, but very often their partners, their family members will reach out to us and say, look, just wanted to send you a message to say, I can't believe how much this is helping my husband or my father or my brother. And just having a regular space to decompress and, meet with other like-minded men to be able to talk and process your feelings it can be really valuable. I know, a lot of us can relate to difficult periods of time in our lives where it's interesting because what happens with men, we don't talk about it quite so much. The other thing that happens is the more difficult things get, the more we withdraw. So the more stressful it gets and the more pressure we put on ourselves. And before you know it, you get into a really dark place. And I have to admit, I've been there in my life in the past. And actually, one of the reasons I set up the group was to kind of help myself as much as anybody else. And it's worked. I've really enjoyed the benefits of setting it up, leading it, getting to know the different members of the group, running the WhatsApp group and providing support, pointing people to different resources that can help them with mental health and awareness. And it's become a bit of a passion for me and Steve, my partner, in it now. And yes, I have to say it's something I'm quite proud of doing. It doesn't actually take up too much time, but it does make a really big impact for the guys that join us and for the local community. So yeah, I've been really proud to do it. If anybody wants to check it out, it's there's a Facebook page where most of our kind of publicity goes on. It's Walk and Talk for Men St. Neots, which is STNEOTS. And if anybody's in the Cambridgeshire area or prepared to travel to the Cambridgeshire area, then you are very welcome to join us on one of our walks. That's
brilliant. Justin, that's fantastic. And like you're helping 30 plus men every time. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Like it's not great. Like I would have been in the same boat as you, thinking, oh, one person might turn up, but to get like 30 people regularly turning up, that's not just 30 individual men, that's 30 families.
Exactly.
30, businesses potentially. Like it has a big knock-on effect. So keep it up. Well done. That's very good.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
Very impressed.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Right, let's start to wrap this thing up. So I like to ask my guests one final question, and that is, what is your number one piece of advice for a new practice owner?
Number one piece of advice for me, I'm going to go back to the piece of advice I gave earlier. Remember, you're not on your own. Remember, you're building a team, and the importance of that team, engaging them, communicating with them, seeking their opinion. You don't have to take their opinion, but seek their opinion, because sometimes ideas, even if you don't take the first idea that lands, actually it'll inspire you to think about something else that will be related to the idea that your team shares with you. So that would be the thing for me. Once you've got your team in place, engage the team, talk to the team, remember you're not on your own, and actually that team can be your own community in the practice to help you drive the business. That would be my number one piece of advice.
Brilliant. Perfect advice. If people are interested in reaching out to you and getting in touch, how can they do that?
Best way to get me is if you go to Linktree. If anybody's interested, I'll share this link with you, Mike, but Linktree / Justin Leigh, and it's Leigh. All of my contact details are on there, all the web links everywhere. So you can just one place where you can get to everything to contact me.
Perfect. I will include that in the show notes.
Brilliant.
So finally, thank you very much, Justin, for your time today. I really appreciate it. I've learned a lot. I'm hoping the listeners will have as well. Really appreciate your time. And I'm looking forward to reading your book, listening to the podcast, basically consuming a lot of Justin content.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time to invite me on and have the discussion. Thank you.
My pleasure. Perfect. Brilliant. Thanks, Justin.
Cheers. Thanks, Mike. See you.